Hi, I'm Rob Cosman. Welcome to my shop. If you're looking for a really strong joint that includes the flexibility of being able to assemble and disassemble, a Tusk Mortise and Tenon joint like I have on my bench. Really strong. I'm going to show you how I do it. I'm Rob Cosman and welcome to my shop. We make it our job to help you take your woodworking to the next level. If you're new to our channel, be sure to subscribe, turn on that notification bell, and don't forget to turn on the notification on your mobile device so you'll know every time we release a new video. Good? All right, back to the bench. Mortise and Tenon has been around as long as furniture has. Extremely strong joint, proven itself over time. But there's a nice feature where you can make it so that you can take it apart. Now, this is a saw bench that I built so that it would travel in my tool cabinet. I needed to be able to put it together, have it rock solid. I didn't want to use screws and bolts. Had to be rock solid when it was together, yet could easily be disassembled, taken all apart, packed into the cabinet, and shipped off to the next show. So what I did was I used plywood on the ends. Now the hole in the plywood that we call the mortise, and it's not made to be a super precise fit, just because of the nature of it. The hole that goes through the tenon actually has a slope on one side, and that's matched by the wedge. So when you tap that in, and it's designed to come tight somewhere around the halfway mark, tap that in like that. That is as solid as you're going to get it, and solid as any joint that you would have in that, like that. Now the nice thing about it is when you're done, and it's time to take it apart, because the slope is slight enough, just a few taps from that side, it comes apart, and there you go. I've never had it work loose on me. Now, you'll often see these made with the wedge coming down through the top. And to me, it just seemed like an awful lot of extra work for no gain. You've got a huge mortise to cut as opposed to a much smaller one going through, in this case, a ½ inch worth of material. And like I said, I don't see any advantage. I suppose there could be at some point, but these are the ones that I usually do. You'll see down on the bench, same idea, coming through the side. And I added a little bit of a feature. I used a different colored wood just to highlight it a little bit. I didn't do that on this because of the utilitarian nature of it. Okay, this is what I'm going to walk you through. I'm just going to take it apart. So we'll cut our mortise first. It's always easier to cut the mortise and fit the tenon to it. Cut our mortise. Next thing we'll do is we'll cut the slot through. We've got a 5-degree slope, and then the last thing is we'll make our wedge. When you put them all together, fairly snug, you put that wedge on the right side. When you put that in, there's no way that's coming apart. Okay, I'm going to use these two pieces of poplar. They're the same thickness, which is irrelevant to what we're doing. This piece is going to have the mortise in it, which is the square hole. This one will be the peg that goes through. Now, you can put a shoulder all the way around. I'm only going to put a bit of a shoulder on top and bottom, so the mortise is going to be the same width as this piece. That's why, well, if you want to maintain maximum strength, well, any amount you cut down the tenon is going to make that the weak link. So by just cutting a little shoulder off top and bottom, we're maintaining the bulk of this. So first thing I want to do is I'm going to put it right in the center of this. So this measures 4 1/8 of an inch, so 2 1/16 is the center. And this is 15/16 of an inch wide. And I'll actually use my marking gauge for that. But if we were building a piece of furniture, we would obviously have to have this in the exact spot we want. But for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to put it roughly in the middle. So this is almost 3 1/4. I'm going to leave about a 1/4 inch shoulder on either side. So the overall length of the tenon is going to be 2 3/4. So we'll come up here 2 3/4. And there's lots of ways to cut this. I'm going to use a hollow chisel mortiser, and I'll show you how I do it, but you could chop it entirely by hand with a mortise chisel. You could do it with a router. But as I said, I'm going to do it with my hollow chisel mortiser. Okay, so I've got these edges are parallel. So I'm going to go ahead and scribe a line from line to line and then flip it over and do the same thing on this side. That should be right on. Now, why didn't I put my marking gauge here? Well, because the cutter has the bevel on the inside. So if I were to do it here, I'd have a bevel out here. I want the bevel to be on the inside. So I marked all the way over, flipped it over and did the same thing. Now I've got to do the same thing. Actually, I don't need to do the same thing on the other side. With the hollow chisel mortiser, I'm going to cut all the way through. I don't need to worry about that opposite side. So I'm going to go from here to here. Now I'm going to use a 1/4 inch hollow chisel mortiser. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to make a 1/4 inch cut here. And I'll do one down here. I'll do one here. I'll do one here, and then I'll do a series of them all along here and along there. I'll do one here and one here, and that'll take out this piece left off, and then I've got to come in here and I'll have to clean that up. Usually the hollow chisel mortise doesn't give me a perfect cut. Now these hollow chisel mortises are pretty inexpensive, so if you're thinking about getting one, or you want to learn how to use it, we recently did a video on setting it up, sharpening it, the whole process, and we'll leave a link below. If you'll notice, I left the marking gauge line on. The hollow chisel doesn't give me a perfect line, no matter how careful you are in setting it up. You usually have a little less than smooth surface, but I can go in with a chisel now and just do a little bit of work to that. I'm going to go in and define that line. That'll give me a nice edge to reference my chisel on. I'm going to do it the same on the back side. Now I'll just go ahead with a slight undercut so that I end up with a nice clean line on the surface where the tenon is going to interact. Now I want to define the ends so that they're a nice, clean cut. A marking knife will allow me to set my chisel right down in it. Now, since I'm going to have a shoulder on the inside, I'm not going to worry about where the V is in terms of the marking gauge cutter. That's too long for my marking gauge, but I can use my panel gauge. Okay, so the mortise is done. Out here on the surface, what you're going to see, it's a nice, clean, tight and sharp corners. Everything's nice and straight. Backside's not bad either. A little bit of chipping there, but that's all going to be hidden under the shoulders. And I've got to remove a little more material in order for it to do that. Close, check both sides in case we take it out of square, I shouldn't say out of square, get the sides out of parallel. Okay, we'll fine tune this once we've done all of our machining. That way it'll give us a chance to get rid of any marks made in the process. So when we're laying this out, the thing that we have to keep in mind is that we're putting a fair bit of force on this part of the tenon. So we need to make sure we have enough material here to counteract that. And how much is enough? Well, it's obviously going to depend on the circumstance, but I'm going to suggest here we make, that is 1.5 inches, 3/4, 2 1/4 inches. So we'll go 2 1/4, we'll do the same thing on this. So I'm going to set my marking gauge for 2 1/4. And remember, we're only going to do this on the edges. And we can come down here just a little bit. And we can cut this with a handsaw, we can cut it with a bandsaw. I'm going to set up the table saw and do it over there. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get this so that the length of my tenon is correct to this. And because I'm centering everything, what I'm going to do is just set my table saw to take off. I'm just going to take a shallow cut about in here, about maybe 3/4 of an inch, flip it over and do the same thing on the other side and keep moving the fence over until that eventually fits in there. And then I'll know where my mark is. Okay, just a little bit of wiggle room and that's fine. Now I'll go ahead and set the height of the blade off of that. Okay, I'm just going to draw a line on here. And then take that apart and we'll lay out our mortise that we're going to cut there for the wedge. Okay, so we need to decide how big or how wide we want our mortise to be. We don't want to, this mortise for our wedge. We don't want to sacrifice too much strength, so I wouldn't want to come all the way over to here. That's probably just about right. And it gives us lots of surface area. Now, you have to remember, if you're building something out of softwood, that you run the risk of having that wedge mark up the face of that soft wood. So on a piece of softwood, you're going to want even more surface area on the wedge. Harder wood, you can get away with a little bit less. So this is 2 3/4, 2 inch, no, 1.5 inches. Yeah, I'm going to go with 1.5 inches wedge. So if this is 2 3/4, 1 3/8 is our half mark. What did I say, 1 inch or 1.5 inches? 1 inch. So there's where our wedge is going to go. Now, we want to actually go below this line because when we put it together, we don't want it to accidentally bottom out. So we want a little bit of surface area or a little bit of that mortise sitting below this surface. So I'm going to suggest we come in here. I'm going to use a marking gauge. We'll set it so that we're about a 32nd. You could even go as much as a 16th, but I'm going to go about a 32nd of an inch below. And I'll go ahead, scribe that line. Do the same thing on this side, but we got to carry these lines over. Nice thing about a wheel gauge is you can just roll it to get that last little bit. Okay, I'm going to go over and use the hollow chisel mortiser again. I'm going to cut a 1/4 inch slot out of there. So I'll make one cut here, and come back, do one in the middle, and then take those 2 little bits. Then we'll introduce the slope with the chisel. Okay, well, our wedge is going to have about a 5 degree, it's going to have a 5 degree slope. So, and we're going to customize the wedge to fit. So, I think what we'll do is just mark it. We can make it as thick as we need. I want to make sure that when I come all the way through, I get a nice clean line over here because you're going to see that as well. So I'm going to make sure that I'm up about this far, and I'm just guessing at this. I'm going to take about a 1/16 of an inch material off. And this is mostly just so I have a nice reference spot for my chisel. I'm just going between the lines. Now, chisel's nice and sharp. We've got to hold that at 5 degrees. The easiest way to do that is to cut a block. Cut a 5 degree slope on a block and then clamp it right there so that it will hold itself as we chop against it. But I don't have a whole lot of material back here, so hopefully these 2 are still, no, they're not. Well, I'm going to make a new one. This is out of a piece of softwood, and it just doesn't hold as well. I'm going to get a piece of hardwood and go over and cut a 5 degree slope on it. If you want this to not move, I find lots of applications for this sticky back sandpaper. And we'll put that in place, put the square on. know what? I don't think we're going to get where we want. I don't think that's enough. I'm going to move that up a little bit. About there. You want it to be, this to be square to the side, so when you put your wedge in and it tightens, it's square and not off on an angle. You'll see what I mean when we do it. Now we've got the bulk of it. We'll set the chisel right up against the block. All right, we got a nice clean, if you got a backup block behind you, you got a nice clean line here and there. So when our wedge goes in, it'll look nice and crisp. Now I'm just going to get a final step on this, just to get rid of the pencil marks. Just give that a little more freedom to move in there. Okay, so that's sitting below the surface, so that's great. That'll allow us to pull it in tight. And the wedge is going to be an inch. We'll fine tune it. And how long do we want to make it? Well, just for looks, I'm going to suggest we probably want to go 2.5. And then it needs to be, well, I'm going to start with 3/4 and work my way down. I'm going to use a piece of Osage orange. And this is piece, I purposely kept it this long just so that I can hold it a little safer on the table saw. So we'll take that, we'll ignore the 2.5 for right now. We'll take this down to 1 inch, 1 inch wide, and then we'll go over and we'll draw on there our 5-degree slope. But I want to square up the end too. Okay, I like to have everything squared up just so that when I'm using a surface for a reference, I know I can trust it. One more. Okay. So we said we're going to go about 2.5 inches. So if we came out to here, this is more or less just going to be a handle for working with it. I'm going to use my protractor and I'll set it for 5 degrees. And we want this end to come over to about here. So if we put that through and put it up tight, and just kind of guess at how. Let's try this again. So if we put this through, 2.5 inches is right there. That means we'd have it right about there. So if we put that up tight at the bottom, we're going to bring that down to about less than 1/8 of an inch. So we'll start out here at the 1/8 mark. This is what I mean about squaring off the end of the board on the shooting board, because now I can set that on there and trust my mark. Now we're going to need at least 5/16 at the open end in order for it to tighten. Now we may have to make this a little bit longer or start a little bit heavier there. So I'm going to plane that off and give it another go. Let's try 3/16. There's our 2.5. Now we said we need 5/16 to pull it tight, which is down here. So what we're going to do is just going to create a bit of a ball up here on the back end, which makes it a little easier to pound on and to get a hold of it when it comes time to pulling it out. So I'm going to go to the bandsaw and I'm going to cut most of this. I'm keeping this on because then I'm going to use the table saw to cut that 5-degree slope accurately. It's not that I can't get accuracy from the bandsaw, but I can't get as smooth a surface. So table saw with a nice sharp blade will give me what I want. I'm going to do this in a couple of stages so I'm not having to make that deep cut all at once. And to help hold it in place, I'll put a clamp on here with a block. Holding that square. Now I need something to keep that in line. I do that. Now I made a mistake and took part of that off. I don't know whether I can salvage this or not. I'm going to try. I'll move the fence over and see if we can't eliminate that and still use the wedge. Okay, I'm going to get that to fit before I go ahead and cut the rest of this off. Okay, still have a bit of a problem. So when I put that in tight, we want to have full contact on the inside. But you can see I can move that wedge a little bit. So I'm tight here, but I'm not tight there. Now we could just finish it and then do the shaping on the bottom with the on the shooting board. But I'm going to go back over to the table saw and I'm going to take another, maybe just 1/4 of a degree to get that perfect. some work on the disc sander. Okay, there's our wedge. Obviously it goes in from one side. Now I took a big chunk out in the saw, so I'll have to make a new one. But we put that in place. Tap that home. Pulls those shoulders up nice and tight, rock solid. Now I'd go in and cut a little chamfer around here as well. You would want to leave sharp edges on that. Okay, there you go. Tusk Tenon, nice and strong, the ultimate in being able to knock something down and put it back together. If you enjoy my method of work and like my style of teaching, click on any one of these videos to help take your woodworking to the next level. I've always said better tools make the job so much easier. If you click on the plane and chisel icon below, it'll take you to our site and introduce you to all the tools that we actually manufacture right here in our shop. It'll also give you information on our in-person and online workshops.